This is Al. I'm in Philly. I've been in a bad mood, and Amber Rose just gave me a cookie, which I'm rudely going to eat now because I need it. Oh, this is great. We have Maria here. Hi, Maria. Longtime friend, an artist locally. I'm getting a little echo. You got that? And Mandana came from New York. Hey, Mandana.
Hey, Al.
We have Anna on the phone. Hello, Anna.
Hey, Al.
Why do you have two laptops?
Because this is the phone laptop and this is the AM laptop.
That's great. I think you should go for 3. We have Lily, who I think, and I really, this is saying something, the smartest person improvisationally I have ever met. You said something in class the other day that was just, like,
Wow, thank you.
studying this for 35 years, and she has to just like put it all together. You're amazing. Hi, Lily.
Hi.
Davey, how are you?
I'm good,
I just
Al. How
gave
are
out
you?
the best
Yeah, I was gonna
superlative
say,
there
I
could be,
defer
so there's
to the
nothing
person
left.
next to me.
But I've said lots of superlatives about you, so you're.
We have our love, Al.
You do. You said you love me on the air in front of witnesses.
That's true.
And I said
continue to love you.
and I said it back.
Oh.
All right. Well, we'll see how we feel at the end of this webcast. Davey, I think you're Gabe. Gabe. Gaby.
Hi.
How are you?
Hi,
Amber,
Al.
Amber Rose. Hi.
Hi, Al.
And we have Erica Kaufman there in the web hangouts,
Hi, Al.
whatever they're called, Google Hangouts. Hi, Erica. And Dave Poplar in the Southwest. Hello, Dave.
Good morning.
And we have Maurice, who's oh, there she is. I see her. Hi, Maurice. Maurice might not be able to hear us. Anyway, I'm sure that she will join us. Okay, 484-352-2429. Chris, can you bring my voice in the room down just slightly? 484-352-2429 is the phone number, and this week we're talking about Week 7, Chapter 8, which is the New York School, and in ModPo Plus, and particularly second generation. There is second generation in the main ModPo. Technically Bernadette Mayer is second generation, right? So is Ted Berrigan. And then in ModPo Plus, we have second and a half or third generation Eileen Moss, represented by 3 poems because she's that great, and then a fourth generation New York School. In this particular poem, Patrickrossol, and he's in the main syllabus, so that's cool. I'm going to go over those in a minute, but a couple of shout-outs at the beginning. This week in ModPo, those who are writing essays are writing about a poem by Frank OHara called Personal Poem. We hope that if you haven't had a chance yet, this being Wednesday, and we'd love to have them all in by Sunday, so this is your chance to read Personal Poem. For those of you who are coming back to ModPo from previous years and are thinking, oh, it's the same essays every year. Well, this is new. Personal Poem is new, so maybe you'll write about it. Second shout out of 3, and then we'll get started. So Alana Shaw, who is a CTA, a wonderful person, has sent a book of poetry. What Are We Ate? And she points out a couple of things. One is in acknowledgments. ModPo gets an acknowledgement, a significant acknowledgement. We're really thrilled about that. And then one of the sections has an epigraph. Anna, epigraph, epitaph, or epigram? We spent most of our time in London distinguishing between and among those. Anyway, it's an epigraph quoting me, the how of what I'm doing is the what, which I think is really cool. Anyway, I don't know where I got that from. So thank you, Alana. This is great, right? I imagine that people could buy this if you just go searching for it. I don't know where it's available. And finally, before we get started, a shout out to April Johnson. April. So that's Amber Rose Johnson's mom. And April, where is April?
In Providence.
Providence, Rhode Island.
Hey, Mom.
April, 484-352-2429. So you're going to call and say, Amber Rose, why are those glasses so big?
That is what she would say.
I know. Anyway, hey, April, in all seriousness, we're glad you're part of this community. I hope you're enjoying it. So I'm going to just read the titles of the poems, and then I just want some suggestions from the 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9 of you, and Anna 10, for a poem we might start discussing. OHara, Day Lady Died, much talked about. We probably won't want to do that, but it's a great poem. Kenneth Koch, Variations on a Theme. I think we can not do that. We don't have to do that, though it's funny. And it really tweaks Williams in a way. Ashbery, The Instruction Manual, fabulous, interesting. Barbara Guest's 20, which might be word for word, phrase for phrase, the best poem of the week. It's so amazing. Hard, difficult. Ashbery's Some Trees, which is an anthemic Maude Pope poem, and no doubt that in memory of John, maybe at the end of the session we'll all just recite Some Trees, which is supposedly about trying to figure out poetically and personally and psychologically how to encounter gay love at Harvard back when you had to leave town to do that. But it almost feels elegiac now. So Ashbery's Hard Times, which is about Reagan years and Reaganomics, not a typical thing because it's a political poem and he wasn't so overtly political very often. Ted Berrigan, 3 pages. Bernadette Mayer, Invasion of the Body Snatchers. There's a perfect poem. Patrickrossol, Uptown Ode that ends on an ode to the machete. And I just want to point out 2 ModPo Plus poems that we might decide to talk about, or 3. James Schuyler's Salute, which is a new poem, and Davy is sort of the one who induced us to talk about that. It's a really great poem. Highly recommend it. And 3 poems by Eileen Moss we could talk about. The one called Writing, which is metapoetic. Snakes, which is metapedagogical, and it's a poem that Erica loves. And Mount St. Helens, which is also a metapoem. So let's pick a couple of poems that we want to talk about. I'm sure we'll be interrupted, which is great, by others calling in or tweeting, and you want to use the hashtag ModPoLive, or by people in the forums. Who's looking at the forums? I think Amber Rose, Gabe. Okay.
There's 2 really great questions about the instruction manual.
Okay.
So we may well just want to
Okay,
start
so
there.
there's one. Nomination is open for that.
I'm on Facebook and YouTube. There's also some suggestions on Facebook.
Do you want to tick off a couple of those?
Yeah, Uptown Ode in Hard Times. Should
Okay.
I say more about their specific
Yeah,
interests?
go ahead. Why not?
Okay, yeah. So Julie for Uptown Odes wants to hear more about the end of the poem, starting after In Some Neighborhoods. And then there's also a question from Jack about kind of generally where Berrigan fits in as a New York poet, because he seems very different from Ashbery and Mayer.
Yeah, he really does. Okay, cool. Erica, what would be the poem you would choose to talk about? Snakes, I guess.
I would talk about any Eileen Miles poem, maybe Writing.
Okay, I think we should do an Eileen Miles poem in the next hour, so that's cool. Okay. Lily, which one would you like to do?
Oh, I would pick Invasion of the Body Snatchers.
That's such a
for
great poem.
Many reasons, but it's the season for
It's Halloween.
meditating on being
Okay.
scared in your house
All right.
and scary things.
Let's start with Invasion of the Body Snatchers in honor of Halloween and Lily. So I think we have Bernadette. Let's listen to Bernadette read it. And while I'm looking to click on it, Lily Applebaum, will you say something about Bernadette and the Writers' House?
Yes. Bernadette Mayer is going to be one of our Writers' House Fellows in the spring, which I'm so excited about. And that means she'll be visiting us for 2 days of public programming. So if you're local, you can come and attend her events, or if you're not local, you can tune in and watch them through Writers' House KWH TV. And it means that Al and I and about 20 undergrads are going to be really intensively studying her work for a month, and Anna also. And it's going to be so much fun. And
there's one other thing I just remembered, which is that because you coordinate the SLOPO / online book groups, I'm doing a SLOPO 1 month discussion group starting in early December, taking a break for the holiday, and then coming back in January on Bernadette Mayer, a whole month of SLOPO inside the ModPo site.
yeah.
Right, so you'll hear, I will definitely tell everybody. Okay, here's Bernadette performing Invasion of the Body Snatchers in this amazing, she has an amazing style of performance that maybe we'll want to talk about. So here she is.
Invasion of the Body Snatchers. Moon out and no snow yet, November 1st, the first anniversary of our wedding and the day before Election Day, 1976. Yesterday was Halloween. Next Friday I have an appointment with the dentist. And the following Tuesday is Louis's 32nd birthday. Exactly 1 week after that, Marie will be 11 months old. The day before yesterday, we turned the clocks back 1 hour, which made it seem like every day will have an extra hour in it, not only of darkness, but of just plain time. The time I used to spend skipping lunch is longer. The time for dinner is too early now. The time for sunset comes too soon. The time between dinner and Marie's bedtime is too long. When it's time to go to bed, there's still a few hours left to read. I'm dreaming twice as much as before. I spend all my new time lying in bed thinking. Last night I saw Invasion of the Body Snatchers, and tonight when I came into my room to go to work, I found an old seed pod on the floor by my desk. In the movie, if you see one of these, it's time to die. It's time to write some letters. Good cold air comes in my window. It wakes me up. We had a bottle of champagne, and Marie went to sleep without crying. It's time to read Fielding's Guide to European Travel and the Alice Toklas Cookbook again. A few books by John McPhee, our new American Heritage Anniversary Dictionary, The Adventures of a Mathematician by Stanislav Ulam, and The Wild Boy of Averone by a behaviorist psychologist about a boy brought up by wolves.
No period. All right. Everybody is going to have one quick thing to say. It's going to be real quick. Just anything that we want to put into the record about this remarkable poem. Lil, you first. Any one thing.
Yeah. Just thinking about the ways of the poem keeping time and all of the references to time that are specific but not like they're not anything you could really use to officially like set a calendar. You know, they're all relative. So like It's been a week since X, or in a week Marie will be 11 months, or yesterday was Halloween. Like you can position where the poem is in time, but it's like clocking time in terms of feeling or personal memory than like literal time.
Yes, great. Fantastic. Davey, one thought?
There's a great relationship in this poem between mother's time as anti-normative and poet's time as anti-normative, of thinking about tonight when I came in my room to go to work, both because that's when poets work and that's because when people who are parents, that's the time that they have to work. And it's doing a really soft but really important job of thinking about the political work of having to do your most important work outside of the workday.
Fantastic. My thought follows from that. I just always admire this poem's take on suburbanism, conformity, parenting, which are all forces that tend to take all the spikiness out of a person, a countercultural person such as Bernadette, and yet she finds her way to fight all that, partly by mocking it. I mean, you want Invasion of the Body Snatchers? Have a kid, and up way up in the country like this, and have Louis Warsh out doing his poet thing, and I'm at home and I'm trying to write, and like this is really invasion. I've been taken over. I'm not me. And I just really like the way Bernadette Mayer is always so great at reminding us that in order to write, you should just write. And she gives us all kinds of occasions and reasons and experiments for writing. And it's all about how there's no such thing as being blocked, just write. And what she does here is she turns away from a verse, even though the poem is verse, and she goes to all this nonfiction stuff. And this is her source. And it all gets into the poem. And it ends with a nonfiction thing, which is about the boy raised as a wolf, which is like an amazing curse to put on your own child as a way of sort of making sure suburbanism doesn't take over. It's so fantastically alternative. It's just great. I love its critique of suburbanism. Gabe.
Yeah, one short thing. I really like the way that she performs this, really emphasizes like the stacking of like BS that is in the details of the day, the like, it's time to do this, it's time to do that. But the way she reads it is so, everything is connected, every phrase is said in the same way, the same rhythm. And it's very disturbing, actually. Like, and then you get to the seed pod and she says it's time to die, but in this like very soothing tone, and it feels very creepy. That moment is really emphasized by how flat the whole thing is.
What's amazing is that she and OHara read I do this, I do that similarly, that she's inherited the New York school way of flat reading, which is, and yet she's basically implying as a second generation New York to the first generation, well, Frank, you could just go around on lunch break and watch people who look beautiful and stuff. And I have this baby, and I'm, so there's like, she's almost one-upping the New York style. Yeah, that's really great. Amber Rose?
Yeah, I guess two short things. I'm interested in the way that every event is kind of flattened to the same level of importance. So the dentist appointment and the 32nd birthday and the child turning 11-month-old, all of those things are of equal importance. And how she's kind of talking maybe about a mother's life and how a mother has to kind of take all of those things with the same level of energy in order to, because of the kind of compiling on. And then one other short thing, just to piggyback off the last two comments, the moment between it's time to die right into it's time to write, I find really interesting, because even though time comes up a lot, that's the only time that it's time to this and it's time to something else.
Yeah.
And I'm interested in the very moment when everything gets overbearing being the very moment that she chooses to turn to productivity and creativity.
So you go from dying to living because to write is to live, yeah. And also she deliberately misreads Invasion of the Body Snatchers, because Invasion of the Body Snatchers, it's not that you die, it's that you turn into a suburban pod. You're like, become the person who mows the lawn and is happy. What's wrong? Everything's fine. So it's not dying, it's more like becoming boring. And I think she's trying her best to resist that inevitability of becoming boring. Erica, quick thought on this poem?
I'm going to pick up where Amber Rose left off, because I'm really interested in the end of the poem and the way that you get it's time to die, period. Then it's time to write some letters. And then these series of images and books that begin to beautifully pile up on each other. And then we end with no punctuation mark.
Yeah. Yeah, that's really great. Thank you. Maurice, a thought on this poem?
Yeah, also going off what Amber Rose was saying, I'm kind of interested how the poem is sort of a record of how, mundane events seamlessly flow into culturally significant events, personally significant events, even historically significant events. And maybe it's in the act of writing and slowing down and taking time to record it that they're all equally significant and memorable.
Yeah, that's really great. Dave Poplar, thought on this poem?
Yeah, similar to what Amber Rose and Erica and Maurice said, I'm really interested in this turn, but I find this poem so incredibly hopeful and inspiring. It's just because of that turn, because the first half of the poem, I think, it sort of lists, like you said, Al, all the little things of suburbia that can eat away at us as people. Just plain time is my favorite line in that first part. But this turn, right after it's time to die, it becomes it's time to live, like you said, and it just becomes so incredibly hopeful. So we can go from existential dread to something like existential hope. So
Cool.
I really find this inspiring.
Great. Anna, I'm going to switch the question, ask you briefly to just say, why are you excited about Bernadette Mayer coming as a Writers House Fellow? What are you hoping to get from hanging out with her for a couple of days?
Just the opportunity to meet her, first of all, because she's like such an incredibly amazing, important poet. But I think for me, especially, and this is looking forward to the essay, the final essay assignment in ModPo, but there's something about Bernadette Mayer's, her writing experiments that is such
you get to do one of those as a fourth
exactly.
essay, right?
It's such a generous gesture for a poet to offer up her own experiments as like, you can do this too. Like, her experiments are her way of creating in the face of constraints of time, and constraints of responsibility, and constraints of being a young parent and all that good stuff. I mean, so those experiments are it's so generous of her to do that, to offer that to other poets. And for me, it's something I return to all the time when I need to get something going.
Great. And that leads me to a shout out to Lainey Brown, who is at the Writers House often and who is in ModPo Plus. And what's in ModPo Plus is something called Daily Sonnets, where she, when her two sons were young, didn't have any time, so she couldn't finish her sonnets. So rather than not writing any sonnets, she wrote 2 lines of a sonnet or 6 lines of a sonnet. And This is a real, and she got it from Bernadette. She got the whole idea, like, okay, the kids are driving you crazy and you can't get anything done, so just write a sonnet of 2 lines. That's so empowering, and Lainey does such a great job of it. Okay, what I'd like to do is invite everybody just to read tweets or posts, Facebook, and see if we can take from those questions a cue to do a next poem. So, Gabe, what do you got?
The questions that Anna was alluding to earlier, one of them is from Lydia. She asks, could someone please explain the humor of the instruction manual, and does it work for or against the point Ashbury might be making?
Okay.
So that's one.
That's a good one. Okay, Davey, do you have a tweet or a post that you'd like to throw out?
T would be excited to hear us talk more about salute.
Salute, okay. That was well chosen, Davey, because I know you want to do it. Amber Rose, are you seeing anything interesting?
Yeah, so there's still that question about Uptown Ode. And then lots of folks on the Facebook are asking kind of more general questions about the New York schools, but maybe that's something we can return to at the end.
Okay, yeah, I think it's very hard to make a big generalization, but since we're in the business of doing a certain amount of reduction, because it's a survey course, I think we're willing to attempt to do that. And as an enticement to call the next caller, which is to say the first caller, will call 484-352-2429, and we'll get a copy of this selected poems of Sid Corman and The Word. So I hope you'll call. All right. So I think we have 2 poems. Salute was mentioned, instruction manual. Why don't we just do, let's make some quick work of instruction manual. Anthony, will you get the mic to Mandana? I'll invite Mandana and who wants to do it? Erica. Say a word. What was the question about the instruction manual?
The question was about
humor?
the humor in it, and if it was like useful or sort of counterproductive to what Ashbury's talking about.
So, Mandana, how you feeling? We'll go to Erica first. Humor and instruction manual. It is kind of a gag poem in a way, right? It's like you can only do that really once and get away with it, right? What do you think? Is it funny?
Okay, I'm unmuted. Sorry, I'm just pulling up the poem. I mean, my tendency is to say, yeah, I think it is funny. I want to be able to actually quote it, though. So
Okay.
I need about an.
That's right. I'll come back to you. Amanda, I'm going to go to you. Do you have a mic? Okay. So I'm going to just provide a little context so you can play off of that. But I've always found it to be hilarious. It's potentially offensive, right? That, is it the way I said hilarious?
It just, sorry.
Okay. You have all kinds of money in the bank here, so you can mock me 6 times and then I'll get mad after that. No, I'm kidding. Lily, I'm kidding. Okay, I've always found it to be hilarious because, let's see, it's dangerous territory. He's basically saying, I'm in New York, I know nothing about the world, I'm stuck in this stupid job. The speaker is. Ashbury too, to some degree, but the speaker, saying, I'm just doing this stupid job. I've given this, and I have a boring writing, denotative writing thing to do, like I have to sort of create an instruction manual for a new medal. But I'd rather be in Guadalajara. So now I don't know anything about Guadalajara, but I'm going to invent a very descriptive account, tourist style, of Guadalajara. And basically I can say I've been there because my poem was there. So what's so hilarious about it is basically that he kind of thumbs his nose at real, actual experience. It's also hilarious in that he was supposed to do one thing, he wound up doing another, which is a model for poetry and for life. It lived by the New York School. So it's a real joke about who's paying him for that job, about what the definition of poetry is. It's a very prosaic poem, and it's a gag. Ha, ha, ha. So what do you think? No, just a setup for you.
Yeah. I think it's very tongue-in-cheek. And when I read it, I think about some of those old movie tone descriptives. Now we enter the city of Guadalajara. Where
in the present tense, with the grammar of here and this and
but
see.
He's not taking himself seriously either as an instruction manual writer or as a tour guide to Guadalajara. But he's saying a lot about what the writing process is, how you have to put yourself in another experience. And I think he's actually very tongue-in-cheek about himself. I don't think he's being offensive about Guadalajara. He could have picked any other city. I have a feeling he just liked the word Guadalajara.
Right.
I mean, think about
Well,
it.
and then all the colors and the mariachi band. I mean, he is deliberately engaged in stereotypes for the purpose of thumbing his nose at expectations of what we're supposed to write about. It's anti-Whitmanian, basically saying experience is not a guide to experience,
No.
which is a potential problem, of course, if for somebody who might actually want to go to Guadalajara or someone who lives in Guadalajara.
And I think this is the beginning of where you start to see him edge away from meaning as being the purpose of writing a poem.
Right.
Do you know that it's not just about meaning?
Yeah.
He still is in this case, but when he moves
Yeah.
further along, it's less about meaning.
It's kind of a revolutionary act. He's like putting a flag in the ground. Erica, what do you think of the humor of this thing? And then we're going to move on.
I think that a lot of it for me has to do with punctuation marks and how much he uses the exclamation point, which Ashbery does use that a lot. But in this poem, it's really funny because he's so convincing in this instruction manual he's giving you that's more of like a tour manual for a place that he hasn't been and isn't in. And he's saying things like, look, I told you, let us take this opportunity. The tone is just really funny.
Yes. That's cool. Thank you. And thanks for the question. I think it was Lydia who asked the question. Anna, do we have someone on the phone? Anna, do we have somebody on the phone?
We do. It's Mary Whittaker calling from Utah, and she's got a question about we're going to loop back to the Bernadette Mayer, but she's got a question about sort of like the politics and, poetry and politics and how those are kind of woven together in that poem.
Okay. In that poem? Okay, good.
Yeah.
So, Mary Whittaker, did you say? Mm-hmm. Hi, Mary, can you hear me?
Hi, Al, I sure can. I muted my laptop, so we're okay.
Oh, great. Yeah, that's right. We'll get some kind of weird loop. You're in Utah, and where in Utah?
St. George.
Oh, I've been to St. George. It's kind of the edge of the wilderness.
And no kidding, I've always lived on the edge of Las Vegas, Nevada, and now the edge of
Well,
St.
it's
George.
about an hour and a half from Las Vegas, but I've been there, and then I drove into Nevada from there into I guess it's southern Nevada, and it's scarily like dry and really amazing country.
No kidding, and this is Red Rock country, so
Yes.
as an artist, I paint red rocks all the time.
Yeah. How are you dealing with St. George? St. George is booming now. It's like doubling its population. That's probably a problem for you.
Well, the developers are trying to get everything built before the water runs out because the
great.
Colorado River is in real trouble.
Yeah. Wow.
It will be in real trouble.
Wow. Well, you can move to Philly if you want, because we have a lot of water. It's a problem here, but a different kind of problem. We have a lot of water, but you really can't drink it. But anyway, so you wanted to talk about the politics and poetics of the Bernadette Mayer. Yeah.
Yes. Because I felt a deeply political reaction when after she read the poem and as you discussed it, and that was a great time of upheaval with the Vietnam War ending, with Nixon out, and I had my daughter. I gave birth to my daughter in 1976.
Oh, you and Bernadette.
Same year.
Yeah.
And it was an amazing feeling that I felt more renewal. I felt like Dave did. I felt renewal in that poem, and I felt it in a very political way because I had to work while I was raising my daughter. My ex-husband wouldn't work, and I supported all three of us on a journalist salary.
So you're identifying with Bernadette, seriously.
Very much so.
Yeah.
Very much so.
Well, I don't know who else wants to talk about it. I think in our video we talk about the politics. 1976 is, so that's a moment when we've got Jimmy Carter coming from nowhere, and there's going to be a Democratic sweep of both houses after the collapse of Watergate. So I think it's less about the end of Vietnam. We're a couple of years past that. It's really about the turning point away from Ford, who pardoned Nixon. And it's also the bicentennial, which is really important here because the invasion of the body snatchers is like 1954, I think, or 55. And it's a moment when there's tons of allegiance and Invasion of the Body Snatchers is either read as an anti-communist film, which is probably what it is, or as an anti-communist film. So let's say it's an anti-communist film, which means, you know, like, this is what the commies are doing to small-town America. It's in California, a place called Santa Rosa. And so in a way, they remake Invasion of the Body Snatchers. I don't know if it's about this time or a little after. And it's a perfect analog to the situation that reversed itself by the end of McCarthyism. So she's really got her finger on the bicentennial. And the Equal Rights Amendment is trying to make its way through the states, and that's not going to work. So there's all kinds of official celebration and official equality, but she's still stuck with this baby. And I don't want to cast aspersions on Lewis Warsh without really knowing the biography, but I think she was mostly raising the child, and I think she's kind of pissed off but also fascinated by the Stepfordism that she's experienced, which is another film of almost exactly that time, I think. So
Yes,
does that make sense?
Yes, it does. Do you want to see something really funny?
Yes. Mary?
Yes.
Yes, go ahead. You were going to say something really funny?
Yes. If you can find Mystery Science Theater 3000's version
Yeah.
of the Invasion, watch that.
Oh, my God, that's great. Thank you, Mary. Thanks for calling. And
Thank you for having me.
Yes.
That's
So
the
wait a
first
minute.
time
That was 1976. This is 2017. So things worked out for you. You're doing your art. And
Oh, yes.
Good.
And doing very well.
Good.
And I'm taking 3 courses this fall. Yours, art, and online and through a Santa Fe artist, and archaeology here at.
And archaeology there, which is great. Yeah, I
Yeah.
would think a MOOC on archaeology is a little beside the point, probably, because of the
No,
rocks
I'm in
and
a
stuff.
live class.
Yeah. Well, listen, taking ModPo is not just a one-time deal. I hope you'll stick with us and just stay in the site and ignore.
I've been with 6 years. I've been with you.
Oh, Mary, I'm so sorry. That's great. I mean, I'm happy, but I'm sorry I didn't realize that. Okay. Well, thank you so much for calling.
You're
Call again
welcome.
sometime.
Bye.
Okay. Bye-bye.
Can people from other countries call into this
Yeah,
line?
they can, yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
There's-
And they have, but it hasn't been lately. 484-352-2429. Did you get her address for the book? Okay. So the next caller is going to get Ray Armentrout's new and selected poems. This is a real. What? You're giving me a face. Why don't you call? It's like, this is Anna calling from. Okay, anyway, that's coming next. All right, so I think let's go to Salute. So this is a ModPo Plus poem, and I'm going to play this amazing recording of Schuyler reading it. And then Davey, why don't you kick us off by posing 2 questions to the group rather than answering questions, pose questions, okay? So here, and this, we talked about this, Davey, a while back, but this is, Schuyler, this was the first time Jimmy Schuyler read in public. That was, I guess it was the first time. He just didn't, it was a dia. He didn't do it. And everybody, and Ashbery introduced him, and basically Ashbery said, it was very understated, he said, fasten your seatbelts. This is Jimmy Schuyler reading. We're not going to see this very often. And so he read Salute, I think, as the encore poem, right? Okay, here it is.
Okay, thank you. Thank you all.
So sorry, I'm going to pause and point everybody who's got computers at home. You want to go to ModPo Plus. The way to get to ModPo Plus is to go to any left side. I just went out of ModPo entirely. That's not good. Any left side menu and click on. So sorry, I'm not doing well with this. Click on Resources and then click on ModPo Plus Part 2. And then you can do a Control F search, or you can just scroll down to the New York School and you'll see it. Okay, here's Jimmy again.
salute. Past is past, and if one remembers what one meant to do and never did, is not to have thought to do enough? Like that gathering of one of each I planned, to gather one of each kind of clover, daisy, paintbrush that grew in that field the cabin stood in, and study them one afternoon before they wilted. Past is past. I salute that various field.
Okay. Davey, pose a couple questions that we can answer.
All right, 2 questions. One, how do we understand Schuyler as a New York school poet? He's a ModPo Plus, but he's the only of the 4 or 5, depending on how you count,
First
generation New York school poets who's not in the regular syllabus, and we added him this year for that reason. In what ways does this poem behave like a New York school poem, and in what ways does it not? How do you understand it in the context of Bernadette Mayer thinking about her suburban context, or OHara moving through space? Like, what do we do with this as a New York school poem?
Mm-hmm.
And specific to the poem, what various field? What does it mean for a disabled queer poet publishing his first book of poems after OHara died to salute?
Mm-hmm. 2 good questions. And anyone answering those questions can ignore one and answer the other. So this gives you a various field. All right. I'm looking around at faces to see who would like to start. Weren't you in on the conversation we had? Do you want to start?
Sure. I actually don't fully remember the many things we talked about in that video.
But that video is good, and I urge people to watch it.
Yeah, you should. I will say to your first question, I think the most clear reason why this poem works well in our selection of New York poems for this week, New York school poems, is this issue of the action and the thinking of that action, the figuring of that action, the gathering of thoughts, kind of like a visualization of what is being described or what you are thinking about, and what is the connection to the real version of that, which actually doesn't exist either. And of course, we're writing a poem about it, which is like almost like a third onion layer on top of it. So it has the same investment as the instruction manual, or the poem also from ModPo Plus by Frank OHara, Why I'm Not a Painter, in asking a question of like, what makes something one thing, even if I wish it to be that thing and it's not. This is also probably relevant to like some trees.
It's closer to some trees than
style,
so many
definitely.
other. Yeah. Thank you, Gabe. Anybody else want to say something? Erica, you want to take a shot at either of those questions?
Yeah, I think that what I see in this Schuyler poem is there's something about the New York school that is really connected also to the visual art world. And like the Barbara Guest poem, this is a poem that reads almost like a painting.
Yes, and certainly that explains various field, maybe?
Mm-hmm.
Maurice, can you take a shot at, we haven't really talked about this poem, so this is a kind of an unfair question to ask, but let's see what happens. I salute that various field. What did he make of that?
Well, I guess to me it's different from typical New York school poems because it doesn't have that concrete, I did this, I did that. I see more figurative meaning in it. And to me, it really just conveys this feeling of wistfulness, of looking back on possibly missed opportunities, but having a certain acceptance and resignation of that. So I see really that various field maybe as a metaphor for all the ephemeral experiences or opportunities he had in his life and either passed over or had, and they didn't turn out the way he wished. Or
Very cool. Let's try to answer, Amber Rose and Lily, just try to answer the first question. I'll read it and you take a shot at answering it.
Davey's first question?
No, sorry, the question in the poem. Yeah. Mm-hmm. Past is past, and if one remembers what one meant to do and never did, is not to have thought to do enough. That's so some trees. That is so Ashberian. That's why it's a New York School poem, not because of an I do this, I do that, and not because of the gay in both senses of the term kind of advancement, digressive advancement from one engagement with the city, for instance, at a time in a kind of paratactic way. That's one definition of New York School. This almost goes back. I mean, it's just so beautiful that John did the introduction, which is such a beautiful introduction. You know, Jimmy doesn't come out. He's really, in a way, housebound because of some health issues and also a certain set of phobias. Here, this poem is so, anyway, it's so wistful. So I bought you a little time, Lily. How do we answer that question?
Yeah, well, it actually goes to, like, Davy's question, like, making some, the queer and different ability of the poem, like, more, like, talk about it more explicitly. I think there, he's juxtaposing two different ideas about memory. And so there's this saying, like, the past is past, like, let's not dwell. I'm taking that as, like, a reference to the colloquialism, like, what's in the past is in the past, let it go. And he's kind of saying,
past, right?
What if my past is full of things I remember really vividly as, like, unfulfilled things, or things I wanted to do but couldn't, and this is what one meant to do and never did. Like, what if I feel those as real and concrete of experience to me as something someone else would say you had to experience it? You know, like, what if I can't let go of something because it didn't actually, quote unquote, happen, but I feel it, like, in an embodied way as something that did happen.
Oh, that's great.
So sort of a queered, like, memory and relationship to experience.
That's really great. Ambrose, you want to add something to that? It's a tough question. If one remembers, if I said to you on the street, it would be a little screwed up, but you could answer it. If I said to you, hey, Ambrose, now listen, if one remembers what one meant to do but didn't, of course, there's a lot of that in all of our lives, so we got that part. Then the question is, if that's true, if one remembers what one meant to do but didn't, is not to have thought to do enough?
I'm actually confused by the not. Is not to have thought
to
do enough. Is that meaning, like, in the past, to have not thought it then was enough? I actually don't understand the question.
Right. Well, you're responding in a way that we respond to certain Ashberian torquings of logic and rhetoric and diction.
I think to my reading of it is made simpler if you pretend that is not contracts to isn't, right? So, like, isn't to have thought to do enough? Like, isn't it enough that I thought to do something? Isn't that similar to having had done it? Like,
so
okay.
in
You know what I mean?
somebody tweeting, A. Fagasta, I'm not sure who that is, variation is a play, this is in response to the various field. Variation is play on sparkles of meaning, shimmering of narrative, shadow of images. I mean, that opening question is kind of playing on the whole problem of, especially for someone, Jimmy Schuyler, who is committed to the inexperience that Ashbery also celebrated, but maybe you almost want to say less genuinely, because Ashbery really did like to go out. And you said disability. I mean, one of Schuyler's disabilities, I take it, is a certain sociophobicness. There's another, agoraphobia maybe, right? And that's almost that question is almost about, like, the distinction between thinking that you're going to do something and then actually doing it is, for me, not actually a significant distinction, because almost anything that I think about doing, I won't do, and thinking about doing it is thinking and doing, and it's sufficient. And especially if you're a poet who writes about that.
Yeah, I guess, I mean, I ultimately do understand the question that's being asked, but the is not, I'm curious about that choice to make the question, to put this kind of speed bump into the question, and I'm just wondering what that does. Yeah. But I guess to answer that, that brings up another question to me of, like, the scale of intention and the impact of an action. Because I think, and this is where thinking about differently abled bodies, it really adds something or charges the poem differently, because then you have to call into question, well, what is it that stopped you from being able to do the thing that you were thinking about doing, and what is the kind of impact that that has on others. And actually, every person would have to answer that differently.
Yes.
And that's what the poem is challenging us to be critical of.
Yeah. Gabe, add one little thing, because I think you want to, and then I want to give Davey the final word on this, because you got to ask questions, but you love the poem, so you might want to say something, some more definitive about it. So, Gabe, quickly?
Yeah, there's like a sort of absurdity to that question, though, that I think needs to be addressed. So, like, what's something that I keep remembering to do but haven't done? Find a primary care physician. Like, I haven't done that. Is it enough to have thought about
Gabe,
it? No, actually.
you need to have a primary care physician.
I know. So I know. Anyways, I have thought to do it. I haven't done it. It is not enough to thought.
MDs out there in ModPo, MDs, come forward.
I got this. So there's a way in which the obvious answer to that question is no, right? There's almost humor to us saying obviously not. And in another sense, the thought of a field made out of clovers, paintbrushes, and all this stuff with a cabin in the middle of it is also kind of ridiculous. And so the gesture of salute is not just, I honor that, I insist on that thinking as a person who has these sort of limited abilities. But I think there's also a kind of humor in that gesture too. Like when I say, hey, I salute you, do what you want to do. I think there's a kind of that. Like I'm honoring it, and also I'm saying, well, like I'm sort of throwing my hands in the air about it.
Well said. Davey, quick thought?
A quick thought about this that's extending from the conversation y'all are having, which is delightful to me because I super love this poem and think it's really important to think about Schuyler and disability, in part because conversations around disability don't really happen with the New York School very often, that the robust, young...
They seem so able.
Right, the robust, young, able-bodiedness of the New York School is
walking,
part of...
cabbing, drinking, Fire Island, Guadalajara in your head. Guadalajara in your head is as close to the Schuyler as you can get, I suppose, though.
In some ways, definitely. And I think that there are ways of reading Schuyler that need modes of reading that exceed the way the New York School is commonly thought about. Mm-hmm. And something I want to return to as a final thought about this poem is that if your way of accessing the past is thinking about it in the present, that what you're consumed with is having a present made up of thinking about the past isn't past. Mm-hmm. What's available to you as a present is the past.
Yeah.
And I think that temporal blur, that kind of queer time, is really important to this poem, that there's a difference between being in your office and thinking about another place and imagining what that's like and having a kind of full experience of thought and being totally trapped in cycles of thought that you can't get out of. Schuyler wrote this poem when he was under inpatient psychiatric treatment. It was published in 1951. It was his first. And I think that...
First poem.
His first published poem, yeah.
How about that, folks?
Yeah, and...
It really is a cousin to Some Trees, which was also his friend's first poem.
Yeah, and I think that thinking about both what does it mean for different people not to be able to do what they're thinking of, and what is it that's keeping you, what kind of institutional structures are keeping you from doing those things, and how does it just totally erode the present? Those are all questions I think it's important to ask of Schuyler.
So smart, so great. I'm opening a can of worms that we can't. I'm opening a new topic we can't get into right now. But I'll just say that one of the reasons why disability studies can be so productive in the context of the study of literature, and particularly poetry and poetics, and particularly contemporary poetry, poetics. When you get to a poem that's about poetry, that is all the world that you need to be able. Right? And I think Schuyler is one of those people who has achieved the kind of the final, I don't want to say death knell, the final refutation of the Whitmanian assumption that if you want to be a real poet and a real American, you have to get out of the perfumed room and camp out under the stars and do all that stuff that the Beats in their worst mode took as a kind of religion, like we have to drive across the country. But somebody has to make the sandwiches, and somebody has to be back home to pay the rent when you get back, and all that stuff. And I think that by writing in the way that he does, he's messing around with the queering of ability and inability by taking the gender, focusing, highlighting the gender of that Whitmanian experiential problem, look, Eileen Miles worked for him, right? Eileen Miles did all the stuff like, I need a doctor, can you go out, or the prescription. And she did that for a couple of years for him and learned so much about being in that room from him. So that she, who's a person who likes to go out and bar hop and all that stuff in that period, winds up writing poems that are very aligned with Schuyler in this sense. And that sort of maybe leads us to Eileen Miles. Does anybody want to switch to Eileen Miles? Anna, do we have somebody on the phone?
We do, who's been very, very patient.
Okay, good. Who is
She's
it?
been waiting for like 13 minutes.
Oh, okay.
It's Joy Rothko calling from LA.
Sure, Joy.
Yeah.
Okay, let's bring her up.
Joy, I'm very sorry it took so long.
Hi, Joy.
It's okay. Hi, how are you?
How are you? It's good to talk to you. Did you go to Molly's last meetup?
I didn't because I'm one of those rare people in Los Angeles doesn't have a car, so it's kind of far
But
away
you've
from
been
where I
to.
live,
I've been with you at meetups in LA. You must have gotten there somehow.
I know. I can't even think of the word. I scrounged a ride.
Okay,
But
cool.
I have no real question. I just, after 6 years, I thought I would finally call in, and I said at the beginning of on the Twitter at the beginning of the class, I said this year I might get the nerve to call in.
Oh.
So I did.
Can we? We've never. So I'm so glad. We're going to give you snaps. I want you to take that little clip and show the family we're snapping you from the East Coast for Joy.
Okay,
I remember you very distinctly. I remember what you said at that meetup we did at that coffee shop where we sat outside.
Right.
We had a good time. I sat next to you actually.
Yeah, are you coming back to LA?
In January, I'm coming back. Zach and I are coming back, and I don't know. We'll make a plan to meet up.
Okay, that would be great.
Great. So, just before you go, tell like the New York School. In 6 years, you've made it to chapter 8 a number of times. Who's your favorite poet in this week?
My favorite poet, not just in this week, but in the world, is Frank OHara.
Oh, great. So, which OHara poem that we do you like in particular?
Oh, I guess Lady Day, but my all-time favorite one is the one whose name I can't think of, but it's the one that says, "Oh, aspirin, jujubes," something. That's the one I like. But I just love him.
Say it again. I didn't catch that.
I can't think of the name right now, but it's called the one that says, "Oh, aspirins, jujubes." I might be getting it turned around.
Davey's going to look it up.
I'll send it to you.
Okay.
Yeah, but I just love him, and I feel sad every July when the anniversary of his death rolls around. I feel sad and wish he wouldn't have gone out on the beach that day. But
yeah, I mean,
what can you
Gabe
do?
and I were talking about this weird thing that happened. I mean, at that point, Fire Island had two very distinct cultures. There was that sort of emergent gay artists from New York culture, and then there was still a kind of dune buggies going at top speed early in the morning culture, and the two didn't converge until that moment. And then
I
they
know.
converged
If I
in
could go
such a
back
way
in
that
time-
Frank was a goner.
If I could go back in time, I'd go to his apartment and say, "Frank, don't go to Fire Island this weekend."
Yeah, I think, I mean, everybody who knew him thought this is an enormous talent. He's going to continue for generations to guide
Right.
people. He was extremely generous, very funny, loved to party. I'm just guessing that, the Patrickrossol poem that starts with tearing around New York with friends is almost an homage to OHara before it decides, I think rightly and interestingly, to move off into a different direction.
Right.
Yeah. Okay, well, thanks, Joy. Thank you for calling.
You're
Best
welcome.
to you. We'll see you in L.A.
Okay, thanks, Al.
Great.
Bye.
How about Miles' writing? This is a short poem. Well, let's listen to Eileen Miles. This is, again, ModPo Plus, so you go to Resources, click on ModPo Plus Part 2, scroll down to Part 6 of this week, and it's a bunch of Eileen Miles there. And there is an audio of Eileen. I think it may be her reading that poem here at the Kelly Writers House. When was she a Writers House fellow? 2 years ago? No, not last year, the year before. It's all the years are running together. And you were in the class. Say a word about meeting her and that session we had with her.
Cool. She has like a great vibe. Like, this is like the total like stereotype of the poet vibe, that they're like really cool and sort of like detached but deep at the same time, you know. And so she's totally that. And, you know, with the fellows, with meeting the authors, there's totally a range of how they respond to investigation of their work and analysis of their work. She will totally respond right at you, provide the same amount of energy, and she goes back and forth. It definitely, like, the person who I noted was just so intelligent in the meeting.
Yeah. Lil, you would agree, right? That was
It was great. She was like it was like an equal exchange of energy between her and students, if not like more from her. You know, like she was into it.
Pretty mean joke, too.
Yeah, she was.
Yeah,
funny.
no, she was great. I mean, Lily and I had a more private experience with her the night before, and we were just, our heads were spinning at how much she was saying and how interesting she was, and what a complicated life she leads. All right, so we're listening to Eileen Miles perform Writing here at the Kelly Writers House. So here we go, and then I would like Dave and Erica and Maria. Would you be willing to say something? You can opt out.
I haven't found the poem yet. So.
Oh, okay. All right, well, Mandana's passing it to you. If you want, you can opt in, and then Anna, maybe you'll say something too, okay? So here's Writing.
I can connect any two things. That's God. Teeny piece of Band-Aid, little folded piece of Band-Aid. I ran to the bathroom to see my face. Sometimes I don't want to see my face in the mirror. Sometimes I can't bear my thoughts. Sometimes I can't do anything, but that's okay. Band-Aid, book, God. That's right.
All right, we're going to do it again.
Writing. I can connect any two things. That's God. Teeny piece of Band-Aid, little folded piece of Band-Aid. I ran to the bathroom to see my face. Sometimes I don't want to see my face in the mirror. Sometimes I can't bear my thoughts. Sometimes I can't do anything, but that's okay. Band-Aid, book, God. That's right.
Yes. That's okay. You know, there's a certain Bernadette-ism in there. They're not normally thought of in the same, but there's a certain, like, it's fucked up, but that's okay. You can, okay. So I think, Eric, did I ask you, or Dave and Erica, was it? Yeah, Erica and then Dave and then Anna.
This is one of my favorite poems in the entire world. And I think that it's because, A, it's working. I mean, it's a meta poem. It's a poem about writing a poem, but I also feel like it's a poem about being a poet. It's a poem about being a teacher. It's a poem about learning how to interact with the world and do something with the language that you use. I think it's just completely brilliant. And the shape of the poem and the way that she uses line breaks is also super interesting.
Yeah. Great, thank you. Dave Poplar, any thoughts on this?
I love that God is in it, because this poem is all about introspection, and then it's about God. It just shows you that the view is God is really inside of us. It's our introspection.
Fantastic. Anna, when she says, I can connect any two things, what is that saying? What does that have to do with being a poet?
It has everything to do with being a poet, right? Is that everything to do with the sort of ability of language to, you know, be this thing that we can use to connect any two things, even things that don't relate, like Band-Aid, book, and God.
Right.
That she can do that. She doesn't have to do all this work of like, oh, well, the Band-Aid is like this thing that we use to patch a wound, and God patches our...
Doesn't
like,
have to do
it's
any
not
bullshit
that, right?
association connection, because we don't have to
doesn't
do
do
that.
that.
Poets don't have to do that.
Nope.
It's the ultimate Dickinsonian thing, saying, I'm the most powerful person in the world. Give me two disparate things, I can connect them. Give me three different things, and I can connect them, and one of them can be God. No problem. It's okay.
That's right.
I'm a poet. I'm a fucking poet.
Yeah.
Oh, man.
I know.
It makes you
It's
wanna,
so good.
Right? Doesn't it make you want to... Ambrose is looking at me. No?
I'm just amused.
Okay.
Other thing I'll say is if you're really jazzed about Eileen Miles right now, as I am, she has a new book out called Afterglow. That's about her dog.
Yeah, the dog. We heard a lot about that
It's a dog memoir.
Maria, any thought? Hi, Maria.
Hi. I want to
Great
thank
to see you.
Great to see
Are
you.
you still doing your visual art?
I am.
Great. Can you tell us a little bit about it?
Oh, sure. So I've been making for a long time a lot of work that involves nature, a lot of focus on trees, actually.
Oh, good.
And I enjoy using birch bark as a main part of my practice, and I use it to create clothing and skin and figurative and animal forms a lot. So.
Wow. Fantastic. So it's Markovic, Maria.
I say Markovic.
Markovic.
My family says Markovic.
But it's a C or a K in Markovic?
It's a K.
So I'm just doing that so people can check, can go on the web, right? Maria Markovic with a K, K-O-V-I-C-H, Markovic.
That's right.
Great. Okay. So do you want to say something about the poem?
Sure, I'd love to. Thank you for inviting me to do this, and I'm really happy to be participating today. I've been doing the course online as much as I can, and I've been having a great time watching everybody and listening to all the fascinating things everyone has to say.
That's so nice. Thank you.
I think one of the first things I thought about when the poem was read the second time in particular was the connection between I can and I can't. It seems to me, and maybe this is partly because I'm an artist, the I can part is about her making something and the empowerment associated with making and with doing or building or creating. And then the can't relate to the way she looks or thoughts that run through her head. Mm-hmm. And so to me, the poem is a lot about the empowering nature of making art. Mm. Writing or visual.
Yeah, and she doesn't pull the punch. She calls it writing. Mm-hmm. Right? She's not going to hide the metapoetic quality of it. So I thought what we would do is get final words from everybody on the New York School. And this is your opportunity to answer one of those questions about what is the New York School generally? Why do we keep going back to it? Why does it have some staying power if it does? Mandan, I want to make sure you get a final word because I know you really care about some of these poets deeply. And then once we have everybody's final words, we will pick one of two Ashbery poems. One of them is specifically elegiac or self-elegiac, just walking around, and the other is some trees, and I thought we would just maybe read it together, say a few final words together about it. So, final words, let's start with Gabe, then we'll go to Maurice. Final thoughts, final words on this week?
Yeah, I want to pose my final words as a response to a question in the discussion forum where I'm just trying to get the name of the person who asked it. But basically, this person, whose name I promise I'll get in a second, is asking about narrative and if narrative matters. This is Nicholas Stern off of Sally Shakti's question.
Right.
So basically, the question is on narrative and if narrative is necessary in poetry, because these are poems this week that have a lot of narratives. They have
seemingly,
through lines about actions. And so my answer to that is really not an answer at all, but to say that narrative is going to take a lot of forms here. Like with Eileen Miles, in that poem we just talked about, when she's talking about connecting is to say Band-Aid, book, God, that she as a poet is making a sort of narrative between those three words just by putting them next to each other and just by formalizing them. And so narrative is going to happen in really big ways and very obvious ways, like I'm walking down the street and I'm feeling this, or it can happen in simply the ordering of words. And so is narrative necessary to poetry? But it's complicated what we're calling narrative, especially for these poets.
Yes, and they kind of bring narrative back, right? After high modernism, which was so anti or non-narrative, they bring narrative back as an opportunity to satirize it, to ironize it, and sometimes to just, in OHara's case, just to say, I don't really care what happens. I just like living this particular day, and I like to go randomly from place to place, and that's what life in the city is like. Right, so they celebrate that. Maurice, can we get a final thought from you, and then we'll go to Amber Rose?
Yeah, I mean, I think the Eileen Miles poem really epitomizes that idea that it's the poet's consciousness that puts things into relation, things that seem disparate. So when we were talking before about the Bernadette Mayer, all those similarly disparate events in juxtaposition have a different significance coming together in the poem. That's what gives them sort of meaning and weight, and maybe equal weight.
Fantastic. Thank you, Maurice. Amber Rose, final thought?
Yeah, so the way that the Facebook comments, they've kind of taken a turn, and lots of people are just talking about how brilliant Davy is and how much we love hearing Davy talk about queer time. And I personally love hearing Davy talk about queer time. So shout out to Davy for being really great.
Wait, you got to pause after saying that.
Yeah, Davy.
What's happening with you right now?
Just blushing.
Okay.
And my other final thought is that part of the reason why I love the New York School, or the poets that are in the New York School is because they just talk about the things that they're doing. And I think that when I first started writing poetry, I was looking for spectacular things to write about. And these are poems that I can return to and be like, oh yeah, it's totally fine for me to write about my everyday life. And that's worthy of a poem. And it's even, and people might want to talk about it and think about it and be in that moment with me. So poems don't only have to be about the spectacular.
Fantastic. And maybe in a minute, Erica, we'll go to Dave next and then Erica, but Erica might use up her final thought time to say something about the explicit pedagogy of this. Bernadette is explicit about turning what you just said into a way of teaching, especially young people, how to write. And Eileen Miles, in a poem like Snakes, was explicitly in a situation where she was teaching kids. Where, Erica? It was on at Provincetown, I believe. And she was teaching kids, and she said, here's a little idea, let's all do it together. And she wrote her own poem with the kids, and that's one of her great poems. So it's just, maybe Erica will do that. And if she didn't, I already did it. Dave Poplar, final thought?
I love how these poems throughout this week just really, really prize present experience. And that's why the narrative is so important. They bring things back from some omniscient, transcendental, thought-provoking narrator to just somebody on the street just really experiencing the phenomenology of present life. And I think you could even read Salute in that context, saying that the past is the past, it's not real because it's the past. The only thing that is real is present experience. And I think that's really great.
Thank you. That's good. And there is a little strain from Whitman up there because of Whitman's interest in what's happening now, urge, present. Erica, your final thought on the New York School?
I want to go back to what Al was talking about before with the explicitly pedagogical and put in a final word that's kind of a plug. There was a Bernadette Mayer reading group at the Poetry Project this fall, and Mayer has these wonderful writing experiments that are easily findable.
Well, they're
online.
in ModPo.
And they're in ModPo, right?
Right, yep.
And this reading group that was happening at the Poetry Project, they wrote their own list of experiments. And, it's that kind of embracing of the process of writing and a celebration of generating work. And writing as just being something that's interconnected with thinking is something valuable about Mayer and about, I think, New York School in general, that writing and living are interconnected.
Yes, and so even the most private of the New York School poets, someone like, certainly Schuyler, but even Ashbery was a very shy person. Even when they're shy, they're generative. Even when they're shy, they're generative. You did one already. Have you done a final word?
Yeah.
Thank you. You did. Yeah. That was your final word. Okay, Davey, final thought.
Just to expand on something Amber Rose was saying as we continue to be the same person, is that what I love most about the New York School is the object world of the New York School poems. And what I mean by that is all just the stuff, all the objects that appear in the poems, and that that's something that's super delightful to me, in that as a poet, not only do you not have to write a spectacular poem, but there's nothing in your daily life that you can't put in a poem. And that combination of very normal stuff and very normal commodities feels like a really helpful way to think through. You know that I am someone, all of you, unfortunately, know that I'm someone who thinks a lot about urban revitalization in the New York School, that it's no accident for me that the New York School poems are happening at the moment that the city is being pulled apart, that it's right at the end of Robert Moses's New York. And the New York School is really helpful for thinking through what it means to interact with commodities all the time and what the rise of the global commodity is. Just to be this shit is really weird. All of these objects came from somewhere weird and they're a part of my normal life, but also who made this watch? Where are those people? This is just my watch, but it's also part of a commodity system and is on my body. And I think that some of those dissonances come out really beautifully in the normality and the quotidianness of the New York School poems.
Yeah, and the poem we didn't talk about today, A Step Away from Them, it deals with that kind of so-called urban renewal onto Times Square, where the sign blows smoke over my head and higher the waterfall pours lightly. And there's a just I want to get this now, but not as a photographer, as a poet. I want to get this now because it's not going to be there tomorrow. Yeah. Mandana, do you want to do a final thought?
One of the things I think about with this particular week and the weeks that come afterward is that it's not as strikingly revolutionary as, let's say, Stein.
Right.
But what this particular group of poets and artists did really changed the way we look at expression, both visual and verbal, and what language is and what it can't be. But what I also really love about it compared to the Beats is that it's rooted. It's rooted not necessarily right in New York City, though to some extent it is, but it also has a universality that I think everyone can connect with, which is what you see with everyone calling in about OHara and Ashbury and the like.
Mm-hmm. Thank you so much. You want to pass the mic to Maria in case she has a final word. I'll go to Lily while oh, yes. Yeah.
New York City Meetup. This Saturday.
This
noon.
Saturday, New York City Meetup at a branch of the public library. What's the address?
It's right across the street from MoMA, 53rd.
And if you want to connect with the people in the group that Mandana convenes, you can go to the forums and look
study groups.
Under study groups and look for New York.
And we have 5 great poems we're going to be talking about.
5?
Yes.
How do you do that? That's crazy. I only try to do 2.
We bend time.
We went all the way to London and only did 2. Well, New York's great. It's the greatest city in the world. Maria? Actually, I wanted to go to Lily first and then Maria. So, yeah. No, she doesn't need the mic. You do.
Yeah, I really like what Davey said about New York School in the context of urban renewal, because what I was going to say was reading New York School this week in the context of major cities in America, mortifyingly competing for Amazon to move HQ2 to their city, getting into a lot of fights with urbanists on Twitter about whether this would be a good thing for Philadelphia or not. I think no. And thinking a lot about whose experience gets to count in what makes a city good, or what a city should contain or allow for, and whose experiences get to just be discounted. There's this whole superstructure of people who make these decisions about how cities get to go on and move forward, and the people who actually are moving through them don't really get to have a say. And so I think about the beautiful, resistant act of writing a New York School poem and asserting your, many cases queer body's right to move through the city and do the things you want and need to do for your community, and how that stacks. It's impossible to stack that up against HQ2, bulldozing through your neighborhood and building there, but at the same time it's necessary, beautiful gesture.
Mm-hmm. Great, thank you, Lily. Maria, final thought, and then Anna.
This may be a final thought, or it may be a question. I noticed that in this grouping of poems that were assigned for this week, that there seemed to me to be a little bit of a theme about how does an artist or a writer do what they do and live in the world, and how does that all fit together. And I liked that a lot about this collection of poems. And I don't know if that's the New York School, that was a preoccupation with the New York School, or whether that just happens to be the subject of a number of the poems we read this week.
Thank you. That's great. Anna, final thought?
One of the things that makes me so joyful about this week is that the New York School is such an open thing. The New York School is continued, as you said at the beginning of the webcast. We have these second, third, fourth generation New York School poets, because there's something so invigorating and exciting about writing the kind of poetry of your everyday that's really, I think, has continued to speak to a lot of poets, even post New York School. Post the sort of time parameters that we talk about with Ashbury and OHara.
Right.
And I just want to read, I'm going to do a little bit of a longer final word because I'm over here stuck on the phone. I just want to read the end of another really great Eileen Moss poem that's not currently in ModPo Plus, but I would love to nominate it for edition, School of Fish. Oh, yeah. Love this poem so much. It's one of my favorite poems. Just want to read the end. She says, I simply walked and the apologies kept coming, streaming in, and I said, I simply walked and the tree turned, no, the key, and the bottom of the sea is flooded with light. We just get used to it. The deeper and deeper we go, and the harder it is to turn the key, and eventually we go, and it is just very, very dark. We just get used to the light, but the blues and the grays and the feelings of lostness, it's like home, it's like family.
Very Schuyler-esque, that ending. So good.
Great poem.
Thank you, Anna. Following from, I was thinking either we would listen to the late John Ashbery read Some Trees or Just Walking Around, but what Lily said made me think Just Walking Around, because so many of the New York School poets are about just walking around, OHara in particular. So my final thought is about John Ashbery, and then we'll listen to John perform that poem. I met him a number of times, among them 3 times at the Writers' House, aside from the 2 times he was a Writers' House Fellow. He's the only writer ever in the 18, 19 years of fellows that we've had twice, because that's how important he is to us. The last time we invited him here, he was really not feeling up to expending the stamina it would take. And so we wound up arranging to go back in a car to New York. I guess I went with him in a car with David Kermani, and we went back. And then after the reading, they spent the night at their place in Chelsea in New York City, and I at my place in Greenwich Village. And then the next morning, we went up to the apartment, and we did the live webcast from there. And at the end, it was very awkward. John didn't like interviews, and I'm really pretty slick typically for these interviews, but it was not working. The camera, the mic, there was only one mic. And anyway, what I mostly wanted for him was to talk about Just Walking Around, because Just Walking Around is sort of like Lily says, it's a resistant gesture. Just walking around. You don't have anywhere to go. You don't have an A to Z. You don't have a thing you have to do. You don't have a meeting you're supposed to get to. You're really just walking around. And that very gesture of walking around makes you an object of curiosity. It makes you seem a little weird. It makes you seem like you don't quite belong. And John, in this poem, Just Walking Around, affirms that the longest way around is the most efficient way, if efficiency can be measured by what you produce, by the thoughts that you share with us. In the end of the poem, the speaker, is a very Ashbery-like speaker, so let's just say it's Ashbery, talks about a long trip that he's making and basically a kind of coming home. And what he does is he says, well, this poem is one of those things that you should come for on your journey, not me, but the poem. If I'm around, John Ashbery says, that would be great. But if I'm no longer around, come for the poem. The segments of the trip swing open like an orange. There is light in there and mystery and food in the poem. Come see it. Come not for me, but it. But if I am still there, grant that we may see each other. Now, I wanted him to talk about that poem sitting in his apartment in Chelsea, and David Kermani was sitting in the back. And during that very reluctant conversation about the poem, John admitted something that David wasn't aware of until that, which is that John wrote it as a love poem for David and had never told him this. And it was at that moment. So David was a very sentimental person. And I imagine just thinking about John, his partner of many years, even more sentimental. I looked around and there was David, his tears streaming down his face, as John Ashbery was, shall we say, triangulating, because it was like hundreds and maybe thousands of people watching a webcast. And he says to David, I love you, through the poem, about how queer it is to be just walking around, right? And to be the guy you have to put up with who just walks around, and telling David that he loves him through a poem that he shares with us. And now that he's no longer here, John, that is, we've got the poem. So we will end this webcast in memory of John Ashbery by listening to John read Just Walking Around. And then we'll sign off and we'll see you next week. So here we go.
This one is called Just Walking Around. What name do I have for you? Certainly there is no name for you in the sense that the stars have names that somehow fit them. Just walking around, an object of curiosity to some. But you are too preoccupied by the secret smudge in the back of your soul to say much and wander around, smiling to yourself and others. It gets to be kind of lonely, but at the same time off-putting, counterproductive, as you realize once again that the longest way is the most efficient way, the one that looped among islands, and you always seemed to be traveling in a circle. And now that the end is near, the segments of the trip swing open like an orange. There is light in there, and mystery, and food. Come see it. Come not for me, but it. But if I am still there, grant that we may see each other.
Well, we have no choice when poets die to come see it, not them. But it is, of course, a way of seeing them forever. So we're signing off on that sad note from Philadelphia, and next week we move to Chapter 9.1, the first of 3 sections of Chapter 9 about the so-called language poets. And Ron Silliman, one of the first-generation language poets, will be here at the table with us, so it'll be fun. So the best to everyone. Thank you for people who called in. And a shout-out again to April Johnson. I hope you enjoyed it, because your one and only Amber Rose is fantastic. Thank you. Chris and Zach, you guys, look at the quality of the image. I mean, it's ridiculous. Thank you both. Snaps for these guys. Mandana, thank you for coming. I know that you're verklempt because you've lost your John Ashbery, but you got him in the poems. Take care, everybody.